Will Florida State's linebacker play be vastly improved from last year? It definitely needs to be.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen every single day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. You can get this pod on Apple, on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, or anywhere else you get your pods. And today, we're going to be analyzing the linebacker spot, a position that, quite frankly, was at the crux of many issues last year. Missed run gap fit. Guy forgot to cover the wheel route. Maybe somebody was a step late on getting to the outside to make sure that they covered the edge. You name it. There were so many different problems that stem from the linebacker spot. Not that it was alone, mind you. It was a lot of different players making mistakes, but linebacker was an issue. There was depth concerns, players getting hurt. So we're going to analyze a lot. Key here, take nothing else from this podcast. Note they've got two guys coming in with experience. It should help a lot. And you got a couple guys blending in that have played quite a bit for Florida State. Omar, for instance, like Nichelson. There's still the question, though, with the depth. Is Justin Cryer going to be healthy? Is anybody else going to be able to step up? The two red shirts, a ton of questions to get into today. So let's start from the top. Transfers first. This is the most important part. If there's any guy on defense that's going to be more of a glue player than Stefon Thompson, the transfer from Nebraska, that's where Coach Tony White was at last year. I don't know who it would be. Now, notice I said glue player. I didn't say the most elite player on the team or anything like that. He could end up being, I don't know. But the middle linebacker, which I think that's where he's going to probably play Mike. That usually is the player that calls the defense. If that is the case, I would think that's a really good part of this. Just get the players in the right spot. Let's start with the basics. I'm not saying you have to tear it completely to the ground for Florida State, but you are installing a new defense, three-man line, like I talked about yesterday on the defensive line podcast, is a major, major difference. How you take on blocks, the angles, everything you do, because the guards are sometimes uncovered, depending on how Florida State plays a 3 or 4-man line on any given play. Linebackers are learning a lot of new techniques and new concepts. Do they absorb it? The backup players, what I'm guessing will be two transfers, Elijah Herring and Stefon Thompson. They need to figure that out if they're going to beat them out. The experienced players have the edge, in my opinion, because of all the times they've been through this, but especially Stefon. He's played in a 3-man line. We'll talk about Elijah Herring momentarily. He is a guy that had the following stats this past season, and I'm not saying this is perfect, but at the same time, if you think about Stefon Thompson, all the different guys that are available to Florida State this season, maybe his stats are not that they're not important, because I'm a stat nut. But if you look at Stefon, and I'm going to pull up his Pro Football Focus a little bit more. If you look at his numbers overall, they're not unbelievable. But again, he sets the edge, or he sets the defense. He does all these little things. How do you get into it specifically? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. Last year, he actually played less than he did the year before. They had more talent last season overall at Nebraska. He played 175 snaps. But in 23, he had 418. His tackling grade was 91.3. This past season, it was still 89.3. I mean, he's a good football player. Now the question is he going to be one that can, with Florida State's massive defensive line? Make sure you check out yesterday's podcast. It's probably more exciting for Florida State fans, if anything, because the D-line should be really good in Tallahassee this next year. I just think that he has to find a way to be a little bit more than just the guy that sets up everything by the middle of the season. Early on, just don't give up big plays. Make sure everybody's lined up correctly. Understand what you're getting ready to see, the scheme. But a guy over the last 2 seasons who's played 600 snaps, yeah, he's kind of important. He had 36 tackles in 23. This past season, he had 18. He's played in a ton of games. I expect him to be the kind of glue guy. 6'1", 240 pounds. He fits the profile of an inside linebacker in a 3-man front. Again, he can take on some of those blocks a little better than some of the younger guys. He's done it before, and I expect him to be the wisdom for a Blake Nichelson, just as one example, to figure it out. And Blake might be competing with him, ironically, for the Mike linebacker spot, meaning middle. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that Blake can play either one. He's such an athlete. I'd be kind of disappointed if he didn't. 6'3", 230-ish. He could probably play Will or Mike, and we'll get into that too a little bit. Now, Elijah Herring transferred in. He's 6'2", 230 out of Memphis. Another guy with a lot of experience. He's played 3 years of college ball, started at Tennessee, moved on to Memphis, and is now a part of the Florida State football program. This past 2 seasons, he had 581 snaps and 710. Like, the dude didn't come off the field. That's a lot. 46 tackles, 35 stops, 65.6 tackling grade. That needs to go up a little bit. But still, he's still a pretty good player. You combine him with Thompson and make it a duo, just 2 vets. There's somebody like Nichelson who might have the most physical gifts of anybody on the linebacker depth chart. Does he find a way into the lineup even early this next season if he doesn't have the defense completely down? These are great questions, and we're going to talk more and more about these over the next several weeks in this podcast too. But at some point, I think Nichelson has to find a way to start, and this is my big question and pet peeve for coaches. Many coaches don't dislike, they hate when a player doesn't have the playbook down 100%. Sometimes you just have to make it more simple. Whether you like it or not, as a coach, do it anyway. You have to get the better player on the field. I'm not saying Herring or Thompson aren't good. I just think Nicholson's upside is the highest. Based on what I've seen, I could be wrong, but if he's beaten out early, that's cool. He's probably not going to know the defense as well. He hasn't played in it like somebody like Thompson. And Herring's, he's played a ton for 3 years in college football. Maybe they're the 2 starters inside early on, but you have to get Nichelson on the field. You have to get Omar Graham on the field too. That's another guy we'll talk about momentarily. They have to make the scheme simple enough. Don't do it. Resist the urge. Do not try to install the whole freaking defense this spring and fall. Pick and choose. Go to your players' strengths, because if they do that, they'll be able to rotate guys more. They'll be able to play in more spots, and that includes nickel and dime defense on how they use. I mean, Nichelson might play outside and be a pass rusher on 3rd and 8 and just line up in a 7 technique and be your outside linebacker rushing the passer. If it's obvious 3rd and 12 situation, who cares? They run a draw for 8 yards. Nobody cares. Let's see them go downhill, play fast, not think too much. That is by far my biggest concern with Florida State's defense this next year, giving them too much holistically, not just linebacker, but overall, and causing issues. The linebacker is more of a thinking man's position anyway. Keep it simple. Don't allow them to think too much and get paralysis by analysis. I hate that. And three-man lines and the defenses for the linebackers are oftentimes pretty complex anyway. They've got to keep it simple. If they do that, then the 2 guys I'm talking about now, again, Herring's a good player, and so is Thompson. They're going to be able to help some of the younger guys, Cryer, Graham, etc. Some of the younger players like Jayden Parrish, Timir, Hickman-Collins, like these guys can run, they can hit, but they are disappointing. But the last 2 guys, the freshmen from last year, they both didn't even play. They redshirted. At some point, one of those 2 is going to need to play. That's something else we're going to get into. Now, here's the guy that I'm most curious about, and I don't know how they're going to use him. Omar Graham, Jr. Good player, athletic, can run. He's got a lot of different traits that I like, but is he better suited for Mike or Will in a 3-man defensive front? I don't know. I mean, his stats weren't bad or anything like that. He had an 82% tackling grade, 26 tackles, 19 of them were stops. And what's a stop? Just to define this based on Pro Football Focus, a tackle at, behind, or at least close to the line of scrimmage, like 2-yard gain or less. He made a lot of plays near the line. Big game hunting, if you will. Nichelson was quite a bit like that as well. Blake might have been the most. He had 36 tackles, 20 of them were stops, and he was a hard charger. When he saw a gap, he was going downhill. Can they set these guys free? I'd rather have Nichelson at will, personally. Maybe Graham. I don't know. It's debatable. Play him at Mike. They're similar size. And let them come in that way. Will is usually a little more freewheeling, but neither one of them has the experience in a three-man front to be the middle backer. So we'll talk more about that momentarily. Who starts? Why? Situationally? What should Florida State do? There's still a lot of questions about the alignments. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed in the latest technology, cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back, guaranteed. All while you get the most out of your day, no stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Situational football. It's pretty much everything. If you don't have the ability to make big plays out of your nickel and dime package, and I'm talking about sacks, deflections, turnovers, you will be scorched. Even if you're great against the run, it's not good enough in today's world because there are too many athletes that'll catch a slip screen and take it to the house. Tackling, angles, all that stuff, they're important, but your linebackers have to be able to get home on blitzes and be sneaky, at the very least, when they are in coverage. For Florida State, we already know. Big body guys coming in out of the portal have experience. They can run, they can hit. How well will they cover? That's been an issue. Blake Nichelson, probably the best pure athlete, in my opinion at least, that Florida State has coming back at linebacker. His coverage grade was much over 50% either. This is my biggest concern. So on the nickel side of things, do you move Nichelson outside, let him blitz some, move somebody like Williams, either Amari or James for that matter, to the hand in the dirt spot and just let him go after, play small? They got to figure out somebody to cover at linebacker. This is my biggest question for Florida State's defense next year from a situational standpoint. 1st and 10 is one thing. I think they'll be pretty good there against the run. I'm very concerned about 3rd down and medium, 4 to 6 yards. Those down and distances, running backs and tight ends can eat you alive if you have one false step. One. As a linebacker, the tight end will get an angle. The running back will get outside on you on a wheel route or an angle route, or just run a simple out or a stop for 6 yards. They move the chains. That cannot happen. Florida State was beaten too often last year in those scenarios. I think they need to figure it out pretty quick, and that's maybe objectively the biggest concern through spring ball. I know they got to install a lot of stuff. I get it. But looking at it realistically, coverage is their biggest problem. Again, just like the numbers aren't great here, but like Nicholson's tackling grade, good. 77.5. That's fine. But he was a guy that was in like 52%. And then with Stefon Thompson, he wasn't necessarily great at it either. Herring in that kind of range. I just think they need to figure out a way to play better in terms of pass defense. If you don't, it's going to be a problem. I don't know. It could be a lot of different things. I'm looking at a lot of coverage grades for like Stefon. He might have been the best of the group. He had one great game against UTEP, but in the 60s throughout the season, had a poor game against Indiana, 54.7. But they ended up giving him a 76 grade. I'm not sure how that exactly works, but he was one of the better guys, and he's not what I would call a burner based on his film. So I propose the following. When they're in a true 3rd and long, 10 plus, I would not be surprised because Florida State's going to use 3 safeties. Shaheem Brown, maybe Ashman Turner, maybe they use somebody else, maybe a corner moves into the nickel spot and they blitz them up. They're going to do a gazillion things because they have to find a way to switch and do different stuff to help the linebackers. Safety in the box, not to necessarily rush some of the time, but to help cover. A nickel might take the linebacker out of the lineup and they go with another nickel and that guy moves into the wheel spot on 3rd and 12. Again, if they rush for 8 yards on a draw, nobody cares. Who cares? It's 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 12. You get 8 yards, they're still going to punt. You need to come up with something. Here's the last point with that. I mentioned it earlier. Jayden Parrish, Timir Hickman-Collins, those kids can run. Maybe one of them, this is maybe a saving grace. They're both young players, redshirt freshmen for the Noles, but they're thumpers. So if they get in a situation you need them to play a series or two, they're capable. But to get their feet wet, why not put them in on, at least in spring ball, nickel and dime packages to give them a chance to learn the defense, A, mitigate what they have to do, B, and let their athleticism help cover. That's just an idea. I don't know if they're capable yet. Maybe they don't read the pass as well. Those things you got to figure out. But Florida State got murdered too often last year, and it killed them. Just killed them in 3rd down situations. And that cannot continue to happen. They'd have a couple of series in a row where, okay, they're doing pretty good against the run today. But then those middle of the field situations, the tight end and the right back just killed them. I want to see that go away. I'm hoping that Coach White, and let's be honest, it's a really good defensive staff. Coach White and everybody on the defense, they figured this out sooner than later, not just to relieve my stress with it, but give the players something to feel positive about, because they know it was not an area they did well last year. Obviously, run defense and all that. But they're, again, like yesterday's podcast, the D-line is going to help a lot. The 3-man front will be good for FSU. They're one of the few schools that have the massive bodies to play it. Strong side end and nose, they're good. 4-man line, they can still be big and goal line, all that. They'll be in more in 3rd, medium, and longs than they were last year. I guarantee it. Still got to finish. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit about recruiting expectations based on the visits and some of the things going on with Florida State football in general. How did they get into this spot? I just want to kind of give my own take, because to be really honest with you, Florida State's done a much better job. Not just much better. They've done an elite job compared to where they were and what they've got going on. And I don't know if anybody would have expected this. Florida State's recruiting class for 2026 is sizing up pretty good based on the official visits. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Seminoles. All right, the Noles are off to a decent start here in 26. They got 6 kids committed. They'll have some kids decommit. They'll flip a few kids, blah, 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 all that stuff. But I just wanted to give my overall take on kind of fixing the roster. Like we're just talking about linebacker. If you look at the kids that are visiting, what is my overall synopsis with it? I think they're in a pretty good spot. Three takes. 2 are positive, 1 a bit of a concern, but it's fixable. Number 1, as I've said many times, they're doing well with offensive linemen. They got Xavier Payne committed. They have several guys that are coming in for an official visit that are offensive linemen that are highly coveted. J.J. Sparks, Graham Houston. They have Ben Mobinga. Just a few of the kids coming in on the offensive line for visits. And there are others too. I'm curious to see if they can finish with that. And this is my big part B with this. Can they get an elite guy at offensive line? It'd be nice. Secondarily, I've said for a long time, they need to do even better. Not that they've done terrible, but they need to do even better with offensive line, defensive line, corner, everything, but it's more location. Central South Georgia and the Panhandle of Florida. I talk about it constantly because that's where Bowden won. The way he won, finishing top 4 every year, that's a pretty good recipe. Let's go with that. They need to win a few more battles against Georgia, Bama, Clemson, etc. in those areas and beat UF, beat Miami. That's part of it. I think they're headed in that trend to the point where it's not elite, but it's on that cusp. They're in on everybody. You've got to get a few more visits to make me feel really comfortable with some of the elite kids. Now, it's only February. Next month, this is the key. I believe it's March 22nd. Florida State has a massive junior day. If you get kids on campus for that, you will help solidify your official visit list. I think the Noles will be in position for a top 10 class if that weekend goes well, and you'll see a plethora of kids, A, certify that they're going to visit Florida State, they already had it set up, or B, they get an official. If you get them on campus, there's a chance. I don't know who Florida State's going to get that they don't currently lead for, but they need to get 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 more players than they're projected to right now to end up in the top 10. But the coaching staff's really been grinding. Everything that I've heard from other people that cover Florida State and from recruits that I've spoken to, they've done a nice job. They're on that cusp. The next couple of weeks to end this month will be the dead period. But once we get to March 1st or 2nd, I forget the date, it opens back up. Florida State needs to be absolutely 100% getting kids on campus and setting up those visits. If they do that, we'll be good. Final point here. I'm just curious if they could also, I know this is picky, can they get a big-time commitment in the next month? Somebody that can be a Pied Piper. I'm asking a lot. I'm talking about a top 10, 15 player in the state of Florida. If you really want to build momentum in recruiting, commitments. There is no shortcut here. Open-ended, public, I'm going to Florida State, I'm shutting it up. They need somebody to buy into the program. Can Norvell and his staff get that? I don't know. It's a lot to ask, especially with Florida kids, because they're usually the most difficult to kind of gauge what's going to happen. But that would be my guess for something that Florida State could do to really help change the program. If you're going to win big in today's college football world, at some point you got to get over the hump and start kicking people's butts on the recruiting trail. The visits are starting to line up. It's getting good. It's not elite, but it's getting better. In the right areas, doing better in the Panhandle, Georgia, etc. Just need another step forward. I'm hoping that spring practice, where a lot of these kids, Cam Brooks and everybody else, come in for visits, will be enough for them to say, you know what? I like what Florida State's got going on here. I'm at least going to say, I'm going to visit, June 13th or whatever. And again, need somebody that is elite to make a public verbal commitment, and they're done. If you can get that done by the end of March, maybe in that March 22nd weekend, Florida State would be in a holistically different spot than what they are right now. It's a decent start to the class, but they need more momentum. They got to get 3-4 classes in a row to get the program where it needs to be that are top 10 minimum. They're going to need a couple top 5, honestly. Why not? Florida State used to do it every year. The effort can be there. Let's see what happens. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Make sure you hit that like button, that notification bell, and share this podcast. I would love it if I could get you to come back again tomorrow. So I will see you then. Everybody have a good one. Take care.